And now for the moment you've all been waiting for. Talking Synths, episode 37. I'm Sam.
I'm Carlos.
And we're going to talk about synths. First, I thought, okay, what would be significant about the number 37 that I could throw in there that would be clever? And so I Googled it, and basically nothing. But this angelnumbers.org says the number 37 symbolizes exploration, introspection, creativity, independence, self-determination, and self-expression. The number 37 is a very creative and independent number. So we've got to be very creative and independent on this.
We're going to declare our independence from clacky keys.
That's right. We're going to talk about keybeds today. Mm-hmm. Probably, if we had to say what is the most items that Syntaur sells, it would be keybed related.
Yeah.
Broken keys, key contacts,
key bushings, key springs, key chassis, whole key beds.
Anything with key in the name.
Key felts.
Yeah. And it's because those are the parts that move on the keyboard. I mean, yeah, you press a button now and then or move a slider, but...
surprisingly very little keyline pie.
One of my personal favorites. Mm-hmm. So there's so much to keybeds and so many different parts, and so many people need to repair them. I thought it'd be fun to kind of dive into some of that stuff.
Yeah, and when you think about synthesizers and performance, probably one of the items that sees the most use, without a doubt. And that's really how I got my start here, was disassembling keybeds.
Yeehaw. You look back on those days fondly, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there'd be times where I'd be struggling to get a key off, like literally, maybe spending an hour trying to disassemble the keybed, and then Gerald would come in and be like, oh, you didn't know about this one thing? Oh, here's the release, or here's how you take this part off after I've bruised my knuckles and my fingers are bleeding.
And then takes about 5 minutes with Gerald doing it. Beep, 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 beep.
Yeah. Oh, here's the release mechanism.
You just push this button and all the keys come off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good to know the tricks. But I thought we'd start off with talking about the different basic kind of keys. And one thing that comes right to mind is, are my keys weighted? Are they unweighted? So basically, synthesizer and most organ actions are kind of an unweighted key, a really light touch. If you're going for a more piano feel, then sometimes they'll put a weight in the key to make it feel heavier. That was kind of the earliest implementation of that. Some other things, they'll actually have a little hammer, a key hammer in there. And you press the key and that hammer flips, and I should have grabbed one for show and tell. And then the later, more high-dollar versions of piano action keys actually have piano-like keys that throw a hammer and really feel like a piano. So I grabbed a bunch of stuff to show. Here is a standard non-weighted key. This is used on so many synthesizers. This is a regular Syntaur key, and right in that part of the key, it's open and hollow, so it doesn't weigh much of anything. And then we have a weighted version of the same key. This is a K03U key. This weighted version is a K03W, U meaning unweighted, W meaning weighted. And so right up in this front hollow part of the key, it has a glued in, I think it's lead weight that's kind of encased in plastic and glued in. So it's exactly the same. It's just a lot heavier on the front end. And so theoretically, it feels a lot different. And now here's the key. It's the exact same key from the K2000, and it's got a small half weight size weight. And so we call that a K03H, H being for half. And so it weighs a little more than an unweighted key, but not as much as a weighted key. So you'd think people would be real persnickety about this, and synth manufacturers are, but there was a time where I had to replace either a weighted key or an unweighted, I don't remember the exact details, but we only had the opposite kind of key. And I thought, well, this is the only thing we got. This is the only way to fix this keyboard. So I'm just going to use it and see what difference it makes.
Yeah.
I got to say, I couldn't tell the difference. I mean, I knew which key it was, and because of that, I probably could tell the difference. But I think it makes so much less difference than most people think it does. And then I think about this half-weighted key. It's like, really, if you replace this with a weighted one or an unweighted one, would you know the difference? I think for most people, the answer is no.
And there is always the option if you have the ability to glue in a weight.
Yeah, true.
We've done that before for in-house repairs, and it works.
Yeah.
And
I guess you could glue a large half-inch nut or something in there. Or not
maybe
like a
nickel.
pecan, but like a metal
walnut.
nut. Yeah. So theoretically, you want to put the right kind of key in there, and there are several different versions. But in a pinch, if you can only find, the other kind that fits in there, you're probably not going to make any difference. Probably not going to notice a difference.
And speaking of key and key repairs, now that I'm thinking about it, with all the keyboards I've disassembled, the keybed is probably where I've seen the most interesting repairs.
Oh yeah, of people gluing in funny ways.
Yeah, just I actually saw one once where I don't know how they did this, but I guess where the leverage was in the back for the fulcrum had broke, and the guy sewed in the key. It was with thread, and he threaded in about 4 keys that were right next to each other.
Wow.
And I was just looking at it, and I was like,
creative.
well, it works. I'm not going to knock it because it works, but that was a very interesting repair.
And yeah, if you're on the road or something and you got to fix it and you can't find a place to get a replacement, well, kudos for the creativity.
I've also seen lots of rubber erasers from pencils to press down the contact. If it's not making contact and the contact strip isn't. Oh,
you mean built in? Or what do you mean?
Like let's see if there's a.
Like you're not playing a gig and having to play the D sharp with a pencil.
No. Like bring over that contact strip. Yeah, so like let's say the key isn't making full contact, and then putting in a rubber eraser, just the head of one so that it presses all the way down.
Funny.
That one I've actually seen quite a bit.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know that trick. So tell what that is.
Yeah, so this is just a contact strip, piece of rubber, and it has 2 black carbon contacts on the back. And basically, your whole keybed is one large voltage divider. And there's a portion of the circuitry that's scanning the keybed, looking for a voltage, and that'll tell you what note it's playing once this is pressed down and the circuit is complete. And depending on the manufacturer, sometimes there'll be 3 nubs, and those portions of the circuitry will pertain more to like velocity.
Yeah. So if you look close at this one, for instance, you can see that one row of the nubs is a lot farther down than the other row. And so when you press a single key, one nub hits before the other one, and the timing difference between those two tells you the velocity. If you got a calculator, which keyboards do.
Yeah. And then so this is another pretty common point of failure when it comes to keyboards. Once again, just because it's something that sees a lot of action, and usually what I see is it's mainly the middle 2 octaves that usually go out, because those are usually the keys that people hammer first. But basically that carbon just wears out over time.
Yeah.
Or you'll get tears.
Yeah. And those carbon nubs, when they wear out, they kind of glaze over and they get shiny. So if yours are getting real shiny, then they might be getting less conductive.
Also, sometimes it's just dirt. Dirt will get in there, cat hair, smoke, dust, everything. Sometimes you can bring them back just by gently washing them.
If you're playing a gig out in the desert or whatever, and there's grit blowing around, and you get a piece of grit in between one of those nubs and the contact board, it's not going to work. So that might just take blowing the grit out or whatever. So.
I've actually had it before where I replaced a contact strip on a keyboard and got the whole thing put back together, and it was a brand new contact strip. And when I went to go play, I had one note that didn't play, and I was like, I just put a new contact strip in there. Like, what could it be? And I opened it up, and it was a strand of my hair.
No.
It was underneath the rubber nub. So it really doesn't take much to disrupt that circuit, to keep it from making contact.
And that's why all our techs wear hair nets.
Hair nets and beard nets. Yeah. But if you do clean these off with, say, some warm water and dish soap, you want to make sure you rinse them off really well and that there's no soapy residue, because that will affect playability. And as I've said before, make sure you put them in orientated the proper.
Yeah. If you put those in backwards, which you can with some contact strips, then the velocity sensitivity that we were just talking about is backwards, and the result is that it plays every note at full volume, right?
Full velocity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a good indicator that you've done something wrong.
And then, sometimes people call up here and they say, I got one bad note that's out. Do I need to replace the whole keybed, or is it the contact boards? What? And we definitely try to refrain from diagnosing keyboards over the phone because there's so many variables. But if you have a working octave, these, like the 12 notes, they're interchangeable. So you can take that working octave and swap it where your faulty note is. And if the note plays, well, then you got a bad contact strip.
Yeah, and if the same note doesn't play, then you got a bad contact board that the strip goes on, or at least a piece of grit on it or something. So.
Yeah, then you can start looking at diodes, bad diode or torn trace, usual suspects.
But most of the time, it's a contact strip or dirty contact board or something. So.
Yeah.
So it's an easy fix. So.
Yeah.
Once you get to the keyboard. And that's a pink contact strip, so it obviously came from a female keyboard.
Yes. Well, we don't like to put pronouns onto our keyboards over here.
Oh, okay. And then I'd grab just another couple of other types of keys. We were talking about the synthesizer keys and the weighted and non-weighted. This key has a flat face on the front of it, whereas opposed to these synthesizer-y type have that flat face way in the back. So this is more a piano type, piano style key is what you see these more in. And then the last key I have for my show and tell, this is more of an organ key, and this is a waterfall type key. Most keys have a little lip right on that front. This one just has a curved surface, kind of like a waterfall. And the cool thing about these is this is more organ style, and you can just lay your palm on it and just on the keybed and swish it around and do I can't even remember what I call that.
Wax on, wax off.
But you can just really do a glide, smash a bunch of keys down at once and do some cool effects. So, and if you have the little lips on the front of your keys, you can still do that, but it kind of digs into your hand. So. Oh, and then back here, I have a whole keybed, which is heavy. And this we can use to actually show the hammer action. And this is a crazy keybed. This is from a Roland RD something or another, but it's got wood on the side of the keys to where when you actually press a key down, you see the wood on the side of the others, and it makes it look like a real piano. And then when you press the key down, it's got a hammer here that's a weighted thing that's about 6 inches long. It actually throws that hammer and just really feels like a real piano. And this has contact strips and all. It's electronic, just like the other keybeds, but a lot of little tricks that manufacturers are doing to make things feel really real.
So I noticed on that keybed, I don't know if y'all were able to see, but it kind of looks like that bottom key isn't returning. It's not springing back up.
Right.
So another really, really, really common thing that I see on the bench, you got a key that's not returning. Guitar pick.
We find a lot of guitar picks.
Lot of guitar picks because they're just.
And unfortunately, not as many dimes and quarters and stuff. But.
Yeah. But they're just so thin that it's really easy for them to fall in between the crevices and get stuck in there. I had a Korg Oasis, an 88 note, and it had a key that wasn't returning, and I was really dreading having to replace one of the hammer weights because it's one of those where it's a long rod that runs the length of the key bed, and it's like the day has finally come. I'm gonna have to do this. And when I got the key bed up and open and out of the chassis, guitar pick.
All right.
I was like, all right, problem solved.
Nice.
So yeah, usually you just got to fish it out, you know?
Yeah. So let's talk about keys returning. Another big thing with key beds is the return springs. A lot of key beds don't have return springs. Like the one I just showed you has the hammer weights instead, and it all works by gravity. Which is weird. If you stand the keyboard up sideways or something, the keys don't look like they're returning, and people might say, something's wrong with that. But it's just because gravity's not in the right direction there. But a lot of key beds, a lot of the synthesizer-y type key beds, I'll hold up this one and you can see the back of this key has a U-shaped channel kind of where a round key spring drops in there. And that key spring gives it a little leverage and pulls it back up. Now, since you're still holding that contact strip, it's nice and rubbery, and key presses down on that. And sometimes people think, oh, that rubbery is what makes the key come back up.
Yeah.
And so my key's not returning, so I need a new contact strip. Well, no, that really has nothing to do with it. There's not much bounce back to that contact strip. And it's the key return spring that pulls it back up. Sometimes people will place an order for key return springs because their key isn't coming back up, and they think, well, I need to replace the spring. I think I've probably never encountered a key return spring that went bad, though. I think it's always another problem.
Yeah. When people call up here and they ask, I have a key that's not returning, do I need to order the key return spring? I usually tell them, and this goes against, a lot of times people call up and they want us to diagnose something.
Yeah.
But it's like, usually if you can just get eyes on it first, you're going to know a lot more detail than I would. And usually what I tell them is if you can get eyes on it, more than likely that key spring has just been unseated.
Yeah.
It needs to be reseated.
Yeah.
That 90% of the time, that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, because key springs just don't really go bad. I mean, we sell a fair number of them, and hopefully it's because people lost them or they've tried to disconnect a key and the key spring shot out and went under the sofa.
They do operate under very high tension, some of them, and will shoot the length of a football field given the opportunity.
Yeah, like mini Moog springs when you're dealing with those. Ooh.
So that's the other thing I tell people. If you're going to order a key spring, might as well, or we sell them in packs of 10. Have some on reserve. Yeah, they're fairly inexpensive, and if you lose one, then you have a replacement ready to go.
Yeah. And now another thing with key springs is sometimes people like to change the feel of their key bed by replacing the key springs. And we have a kit for that actually because the Kurzweil PC3 has a really stiff action because of those keys. And so we do, I think it's that direction, maybe, or is it too light? I think it's too stiff.
Yeah.
And people want a lighter feel. And so we do have some key springs that replace the factory key springs for all 76 of those notes and change the feel. And so that's one thing that people have experimented with. We haven't done so much of that here, but the PC3 was such a common thing that we made a kit for it.
And something to be cognizant of is sometimes the black and the white keys will have different key springs.
Good point. Yeah.
So you don't want to mix them up, keep them separated, put them back the same way that you found them. And if you ever have a question as to whether or not, like let's say you just start pulling key springs out and you're like, wait, I don't know if these are different or not. Do you have any apprehension? You can check our website, and if it's two different part numbers, then because I do it all the time, then I have to check our website to say, are these key springs different? Yes they are, or no they aren't.
Usually you can tell the difference because some will be a little bit longer, so you can measure them in millimeters or whatever. And sometimes when they look the same, I remember some are kind of real silver looking, and then some are more brassy looking or something.
Yeah, sometimes they'll be a different color completely, so that's a really good telltale sign. But then sometimes, key springs will be a different color and they're exactly the same. So just check the website.
Yeah, that's the easiest thing. Let's see what else was on my list.
We got the broken standoffs.
Oh yeah, we were going to have that over here, and I forgot to bring it, but
it's
that's okay. So yeah, one problem. I'll use this keybed to demonstrate again. Sometimes you'll have a key that's actually poking up, and people say, "Well, is my key broken?"
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it is the key because there's on some keys there's a little loopy part. Okay, here's an example. The underside of this key has a little plastic loop, basically, and if that loop breaks off, that keeps the key from coming up higher than it should. So that will make the key poke up like that. The bad news is that most of the time when that happens and you have a key poking up in the front, that is a sign that the little stop nub has broken off of the keybed chassis. And that's a mess. People have tried to glue those back on, and it might last for half a gig or something, but it's not really gonna work.
And then in most cases they haven't manufactured that chassis in 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and the real fix is to pull all the keys off, pull the Aftertouch strip off, pull everything off, transfer that to a new keybed chassis, and then put the whole thing back in. That's a mess. Speaking of Aftertouch strip, one common thing that, before we get into this, you can see that this has some felt, and so there are a number of felt cushions in most keybeds to where when you press the key down, it doesn't just go clank on a piece of metal. It's got a little cushion there, and those get worn out over time. So that's a good thing to replace to kind of rejuvenate your keybed, and we sell a lot of those. And this is actually that felt strip, but it's on top of a sensor, and this is what a lot of keybeds use to transmit Aftertouch, or not to transmit it, but to detect Aftertouch. So you have a key that's pressing down onto this felt. The felt presses down onto this plastic strip here, which has an electrical connector coming out one side. And this basically just acts like a large resistor. And I think a lot of them, at least, if you measured the resistance, it's just a two-conductor thing, and if you measure the resistance across there, it's like 10K of resistance. And then when you press down harder, that resistance, I think, goes down to 0, or maybe I got this backwards. Maybe it's 0 and it gets more resistive as you press it. I can't remember, but this basically acts like a big variable resistor, like a potentiometer or something. So by changing that resistance, the circuit interprets that and changes whatever it is you have your Aftertouch routed to. Add vibrato or make the filter open up or whatever.
So another pretty common thing I hear is, my Aftertouch stopped working, and kind of lowest common denominator, something really easy to check is to make sure that it's still connected.
Oh, right.
Because often it's just, depending, it can be kind of a flimsy connection. It's a very thin piece of plastic that's seated into a connector.
Yeah, and it's just pushed in there, and then there's nothing clamping down on it or anything, so.
Every now and then, the manufacturers will put a piece of tape over it.
Yeah, true, to help it from coming out. Okay, we just got another couple of minutes. So the last thing I wanted to touch on is instead of that rubber contact strip, some of the old vintage keyboards use pieces of metal that connect against each other. Each key has what they call a J-wire, which is a really thin piece of wire, and like thin as a guitar string or something. In fact, people have used guitar strings to replace these. And then those go against a long bus bar, which spans the length of the keyboard. And so that's what makes the contact. And a couple of things I wanted to mention. Those can get dirty, especially if you're just not playing the keyboard. So if you have a Mini Moog, for instance, and you hadn't played it in 8 months.
When's the last time you played that memory Moog, Sam? Our Model D.
Hadn't been 8 months, but it's been too long.
It's been longer than 8 months.
So the problem is, just from sitting, you can get some oxidation on the J-wire and on the bus bar. And so your keys start working sporadically. They sound spitty. Or one weird thing is they make some contact, but not enough. And that's what's sending the control voltage to the oscillator. So instead of getting a solid note, bing, you might get, or your note might glide or do
just
weird
portamento.
things. So fortunately, the good fix to that is sit down and play the darn thing. Because just by playing, you're going to kind of clean off those contacts. If it's been sitting for 6 years instead of 6 months, you might want to go in there with some contact cleaner and clean all that stuff up. And then the last thing I'll leave you with, every now and then we get a vintage keyboard like that uses J-wires, and every time you play a note, it only plays a high C or something. And that can be perplexing to people, but what I've seen in a lot of cases is that sometimes those J-wires, for whatever reason, got pressed too hard or something got bumped, and they flip up and get stuck on the J-wire. And so now every key that you're playing, this top C note, for instance, has already triggered to say, all right, this is the note I'm going to play. And then you play another note, and it actually triggers the gate, but it fools the keyboard, and so every note you play is that high C, and it's just that J-wire has been flipped up, and it's a simple fix. You open it up, go in, and say, oh yeah, that one's stuck, and you go boop, and flip it down, and that's your keyboard repair. We've touched on everything there is to touch on as far as keyboards, right?
I'm sure that. I mean, we didn't really get into the weird ones like the DX1 with the wooden keys, CS80. There are some interesting exceptions to the rule as far as styles of keys.
Yeah,
but
and like the Insonic ones with the metal plate and the induction.
Are the key springs that are contacts.
All right.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So
okay, so we've barely covered those bases.
But that, with the things we talked about, will cover you for about 90% of the keyboards that are out there.
Yeah.
Capacitive, Buchla style. We didn't go over that. So maybe on another episode.
Yeah. All right. Well, soak in all this, and we'll pick up the next stuff in a future episode. And until then, we'll mod you later.